Today's webinar is part of MPG's new European initiative, which MPG has started to address with research and concrete action, the participation gap that exists for new Europeans. With new Europeans, we refer to all those who arrived or live in an EU country and who lack access to full civic and political participation. Today is a very special meeting, marking a milestone for the initiative because we are presenting and launching the Participation Policy Index, which measures the policies in place to support the political integration of newcomers in all EU member states. As we will hear, this new instrument is assessing political participation in 8 dimensions based on various indicators. MPG developed it as a tool for policymakers and policy stakeholders to identify strengths and good practices, but also policy needs and gaps. And I'm sure you all know about our tool already. Such a comparative monitoring is urgently needed because of the political participation that is the weakest area in integration policies. And I would say it's even more needed nowadays because of the global political context. Over more than 1 year, MPG has worked to develop the index, to gather the data together with the country experts, to check the data, and to produce this report. So it might sound or look as something that was easy to do, but that was a lot of work, and I seize the opportunity to thank MPG staff who has been working on it. The agenda of this webinar, first we are happy to hear from Harry Panagopoulou from the European Commission, now working at the Secretariat General, responsible for citizens, equality, democracy, and rule of law. Welcome, Harry, and thank you for being with us. In his intervention, Harry will place our work in the broader context of the EU's effort to support democracy in the EU. Then MPG's team, led by Bashak Yafkan, MPG's head of research, will present the results. And MPG's Olivia Long and Mariana Gorgarino will zoom in on a few exemplary good practices. In the roundtable discussion that will be moderated by MPG's Sinem Yilmaz, Daniela Vintila from the Liège University first will comment on the index and its potential from a researcher point of view. And after that, the floor will be for 6 country experts who have been involved in the research from Austria, Croatia, Latvia, Luxembourg, Poland, and Portugal for any questions or comments that you might have. So please don't hesitate to intervene. But Harry, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event. We've been working in cooperation with you for quite a number of years, in fact, and it's a pleasure to sort of join you on this particular inauguration of your new tool. We've been working on loads of different measures in past European parliamentary elections and also local elections, where you've done some very interesting initiatives to support mobile EU citizens in exercising their political rights in the EU. As you rightly said, I come from the Secretariat General. I was previously with the DG of the Commission responsible for justice, and I've been working for the last 8 years in files to do with the exercise of electoral rights, political rights. I will very briefly summarize what the Commission has been doing, as you say, to put all of this work in its wider context, and also to sort of give you a hint of where we're going in the coming new mandate, because of course we've just had European parliamentary elections earlier in the year, and we've got a new Commission, which will continue to do a lot of work in democracy. The Commission's been supporting member states and other stakeholders in promoting democracy in the EU for quite a long time now, and notably in the previous mandate we issued a very in-depth report on the European parliamentary elections, which looked at how electoral rights were exercised by citizens, including mobile citizens, in different ways, the issues that affected the elections, including disinformation, but also including, the usual obstacles to the exercise of electoral rights. This elections report that we produced in the middle of COVID resulted in the European Democracy Action Plan, which framed all of the work that we did for the following 4 years to promote free and fair elections, to strengthen media freedom, to counter disinformation. The initiatives that followed up on that included a measure on political advertising, which I will briefly mention in a minute, as well as a directive on strategic lawsuits against public participation, and some directives, or let's say a recast of the existing legislation that we have to protect and enable mobile EU citizens exercise their electoral rights in European parliamentary elections, but also in municipal elections. Before the elections this year in 2023, we also issued a defense of democracy package that included a communication which reviewed all of the work that we had done in the preceding years under the Democracy Action Plan, as well as a legislative proposal on interest representation and recommendations to promote free, fair, and resilient elections, as well as a recommendation to promote the participation of citizens and civil society. I'll come back to those briefly. The other thing that we've been doing from the Commission side is, of course, maintaining the funding that we've had made available to us by the EU through the Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values program, which of course continues until the end of the current MFF, which is in 27. Just to touch on a few of the measures which were, let's say, stood out in the last few years. One big one was the regulation that we issued on political advertising. This has now been enacted by the European legislator. It entered into force in April this year, and it will apply in full from October next year. It will mean that all political advertising that is used in the Union is subjected to a high standard of transparency, and also that there are some limits on how it might be targeted when it's used online. This is obviously designed in order to increase the accountability of the use of such advertising, and it's probably we can all agree that it's about time that we had such measures. An important part of this regulation is that we will be storing all political advertising that's used online in a repository that will be available to all citizens, so the citizens will be able to find all of these political ads, including the information that went out with them, which will include information about where the money came from and how much money was spent. The other thing to note is that the regulation will impose a ban on third country funded or promoted political advertising in the 3 months before a national election. That's basically to respond to the challenges of the current geopolitical situation. Quickly to review the elections that we had this year. Obviously, we haven't issued our full report on the elections. That will come in the new year. It takes a little longer because we have to collect all the information that the member state authorities prepare from their jurisdictions, and then we also combine it with information that we receive from other stakeholders, the private sector and academia. I wanted to mention this because there's an open call for evidence at the moment. So if you have thoughts or position papers or similar that you wish to sort of contribute to this effort, now is the time to submit it. The report will Sorry, I see that there's something wrong with Zoom. Is that, am I still audible or?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Apologies. Yes, just to say that the report will cover how EU law was applied, but also, you know, the efforts that member states took to promote participation, to remove obstacles that still exist, to provide funding and adaptations to citizens with particular needs, whether those are linguistic needs or for instance, to help citizens with a disability. It will also review on the follow-up that was given to this to the recommendation that we provided as part of our Defense of Democracy package. The recommendation, just to note in brief, is a summary, let's say, of the high democratic standards that member states already sign up to in the Union, but we've included sort of tailored, specific measures that are there to promote, for instance, the support of voter turnout, ensuring that there's sort of strong protections for candidates and participants in the electoral process. It includes measures to encourage electoral integrity and fair campaigning. We included some calls to member state authorities to ensure that electoral observers can access the electoral system. Also on political party funding and on political party campaigning. Of course, this is not something where we can sort of as easily regulate from the European level, but we asked member state authorities to take certain steps ahead of the European parliamentary elections, and we'll look at how that worked. Also, European political parties themselves produced a code of conduct on how they would sort of act during the elections, including, I mean, also to make sure that they're being inclusive about how they organize themselves, but also to, for instance, refrain from using unlabeled AI content or unlabeled political advertising. We'll see what comes of that. We've worked very closely with the competent authorities in the member states to see what the follow-up was, and also to prepare for the parliamentary elections. I mean, what we saw is that, you know, obviously they were conducted successfully. There were some efforts from external actors to kind of interfere in the elections. There were some questions about the accessibility in some specific areas, which we'll follow up on. But in general, the elections were, let's say, quite well. They were organized successfully, and for the moment, we don't have information to suggest that there was anything hugely wrong with them, and in this they contrast, let's say, with more recent elections. We're still working on strengthening the way that we coordinate with member state authorities and the way that we support member state authorities, in particular with the capabilities that they have to monitor, for instance, the online situation, or to ensure that participants in elections have good cyber protections and so on. And this will be a focus for this commission, where we will be preparing something that the Commission President has already announced, Democracy Shield, which will help us better protect elections, and also to focus on effective coordination among everyone that's involved in elections, as well as better situational awareness, and also more support for citizens to be involved in the democratic process, the political process, the policy-making process, and to ensure that citizens trust the integrity of the institutions, but also participate in democratic institutions. I don't want to speak forever. I think that I hope that I've provided you with a reasonable summary of what we're up to at the moment and what we've been doing the last few years. I will stick around for as long as I can, and if anyone has any sort of questions, do feel free to sort of drop them into the message, into the chat, and I'll send a link to that call for evidence. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ari. There will be questions, but now I'm handing over to Sinem, who's going to moderate the discussion and the panel.
I think to Başak you meant.
Sorry, Başak. Sorry.
All right, welcome everyone. It's great to be with you today. It's a very exciting day for us, and this is, as Isabel mentioned, it's a big team effort, and I am the lucky one to present the results today. So I'm super excited and really looking forward to your feedback. I am going to today give you a brief overview of why we think that it was important to talk about political integration, to do research on political integration, to generate this tool, this index measuring integration of political participation of newcomers. Give you some diagnostics and present to you our first overall findings. Then I'm going to zoom on the one of 3 of the 8 dimensions that we looked in depth for as part of this integration index. And I will also hand it over to my colleagues for some exemplary good practice presentations. And I'll conclude by policy recommendations and how this index can be useful for researchers, for policymakers, for advocacy groups in the field. So I'll start by basically saying that a seat at the table for the new Europeans is important. And with new Europeans, with this project, we refer to a variety of groups, ranging from third country nationals to EU mobile citizens to second generation migrants. And when all of these groups are considered, more inclusive democracies are only possible for giving everyone a seat at the table. And this is also important for ensuring more complete, better integration outcomes. Now, that is from the perspective of a more holistic general point of view, but it is also, there are several studies that show that it's also key to more comprehensive policies and more effective implementation, because when new Europeans, migrants, newcomers participate in the design and implementation of these policies, their ownership increases, and that creates a much more effective implementation on the ground. And there is another question that we always have on the table, that is the importance of political integration along all the other dimensions of integration. Mostly labor market integration or naturalization processes or education are the prioritized, discussed dimensions. Sometimes political participation is seen like a second order, kind of a luxury dimension of integration, something that should be granted as a carrot to migrants after they integrate. We disagree with this approach. We find that it's political participation, political integration of the newcomers in general is not an end in itself. It actually increases immigrants' engagement in both in civic life, but also in other aspects of integration. And it also increases their social cohesion. So they basically start to nurture much more positive attitudes towards the host community or existing citizens, so to say. And they understand the institutions better. They understand the history, the different power dynamics in that country better. They understand what goes on with schooling, what goes on with environment a lot better, because they participate in politics. So it is something that creates a very important feedback loop for other integration in other areas as well. And finally, studies also show that high levels of immigrant participation correlates with more positive attitudes towards immigration by the host communities. In other words, this study in particular that we're mentioning in the report looks at all EU member states and finds that citizens in these countries are actually, when migrants are participating much better, they have actually a much better attitude towards immigration in general, and immigration, different dimensions of immigration policy. This also shows how important this issue is for the social cohesion on the ground. Diagnostics-wise, I'm showing here our flagship project, MyPICS, where we look at migrant integration policies across many countries over time. But the results also show that, not just from MyPICS, but also in all fields of research, policy making, that this is an area where there is a big gap. In other words, in terms of policies, they're not developed, which is what MyPICS shows. But in terms of also outcomes, it is not developed. Say electoral participation. Yes, we know that there are major declines in turnout across the world. People vote less and less, but this difference is a lot bigger when it comes to migrants. So there is a big participation gap, so to say. This is very striking in the case of Sweden, when participation dropped over the last decades, 7% for the entire Swedish citizens. It dropped actually over 30% for those with migrant backgrounds. So that also shows you how important it is to integrate migrants politically. So the MyPICS score basically looks at policies of the last one was 52 countries. The next MyPICS will be launched in the spring 2025. I'm happy to announce now that we're at it. A little spoiler there. But you can clearly see that of all the 8 dimensions that MyPICS looks at, family union, reunion, labor market mobility, health, anti-discrimination, access to nationality, permanent residence, political participation is the lowest average, has the lowest average score for all the world. And this is along with education. When we look at EU member states, the scores for education are slightly higher, but political participation is still the weakest link, so to say. That is why we decided that this tool, that this is an area that requires looking deeper at with a more systematic comparison analysis of the policies. And we wanted to expand, go beyond the MyPICS political integration dimension, but really understand political participation of migrants, of the newcomers, and all the policies surrounding this in the EU member states in a greater depth. For this, we conceptualized it along several dimensions. We looked at, for instance, supranational, national, regional, and local participation. We looked at participation form, whether it is conventional politics or unconventional politics. We also looked at the way integration is conceptualized, and we tried to understand how it relates to participation, mobilization, and representation, also the rights granted. There were some challenges, of course, for instance, tapping migrants' identification with the host society or adoption of democratic norms, but we tried to get it by looking at policies of the nation states, of the member states, promoting these dimensions, promoting civic engagement, for instance, with regards to identification with host society, as well as adoption of democratic norms. With regards to the methodology, it is indicator-based research, which is basically done with experts. And here we have today many of our experts participated in this exercise, and they provide very valuable input from their respective nation states, looking at their national laws, legal provisions, policy documents, official reporting, budgets and spending evidence, official data, public the communication channels, and when necessary, they conduct key informant interviews. The index applies a standardized questionnaire comprising of multiple indicators representing a predetermined dimension of political participation. So I'm going to actually present you 8 different dimensions, and all of these dimensions have a variety of questions that comprise it. And evaluation is conducted based on these specific indicators, which are assessed by national experts, and they look at they search specific policy developments, and they score countries according to preset criteria. So looking into the research, looking into the benchmarks, international documents, commitments, we identified 8 particular dimensions of the new European political participation policy index. The first one is national strategy to increase civic and political participation. Here we look at what kind of a place political participation has in the national strategy on integration, whether or not there are specific goals, there are specific monitoring implementation mechanisms foreseen with a specific budget allocated, whether or not specific groups are mentioned in the national strategy or specific groups are targeted. The second dimension, we think that national strategy is very important. I'm going to get to that because I'm going to sort of zoom in on that because it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the integration areas. The second one is full political and civic rights through citizenship. This is also a very important dimension which looks at the political rights and how much it takes to become a citizen, including permanent residency. And the next one is right to vote in elections for foreign citizens. And here we examine electoral participation rights for third country nationals and EU mobile citizens and emphasize disparities across the member states. The fourth one, also a dimension that we're going to focus on and give you some good practice examples, is encouragement to vote. And here we're going to be measured member states' efforts to promote electoral participation among migrants, including outreach campaigns and voter registration simplifications. The fifth one is promotion of the representation in political life. Here it focuses on migrants' rights to stand for elections, participate in political parties, evaluate their inclusion in democratic processes, while the next one, representation of migrant-led civil society, is also something we're going to zoom in on today, which is basically highlights the support and political influence granted to migrant-led organizations and consultative bodies. The remaining 2 dimensions, enabling collective civic engagement, is one of them, assesses policies that allow migrants to join collective civic engagement platforms such as trade unions, associations, and to participate in protests and petitions. And the civic education for diversifying society evaluates the presence of civic education schools and state-supported initiatives promoting cultural diversity and inclusivity. I'm gonna now move to the results without further ado, but happy to revisit methodology if you have any further questions. Very quickly, here are the results of the political participation index for the years in our focus in 2023 predominantly, and for all the 8 dimensions considered. As you can see, there is quite a variation, quite a fragmentation of policies across the EU member states. And on average, you can see the country scores are on the lower end. If you know, if you've worked with MyPEX data, we're not talking about 85s, 90s as like the higher scores of MyPEX, predominantly because this is really the laggard area, so to say. Even though it is small and not very visible, the leader, the highest ranking country, is Luxembourg, and it is rather peculiar as it does not have a consistently favorable policies in other areas of integration policy, especially not favorable in relation to labor market mobility or health, but the country's strong focus on the political participation of newcomers, also likely to be supported by the smaller scale, is reflected on favorable policies across 6 out of 8 dimensions. As we sort of expected, the Nordic countries, Sweden and Finland, are also in top 5. And also included in this group are Ireland and Portugal, whose exemplary policies promoting participation of new Europeans are supported by clearly defined and well-implemented strategies, which really sets them apart, earning them high scores 63 and 59 respectively. Although not in top 5, Germany, a long-standing destination for migrants, and Estonia, the one striking member state from Eastern Europe and Baltics, have achieved scores of 50 over 100 or higher. But if we were to look at the other end of the spectrum, the 5 countries with the highest need for improvement are Bulgaria, Romania, Austria, Hungary, and Slovenia, all with scores below 30 points. So you may wonder how this looks like across the dimensions, and as expected, the flagship dimension, national strategy to increase civic and political participation, is an area where countries, member states, are not doing well at all, and that needs a lot of improvement, followed by encouragement to vote. That is precisely why I'm focusing on these 2, as well as the following one, representation of migrant-led civil society. What we see when we look deeper into these scores is that even though the average scores for the all EU member states is low, there are actually countries that score really high in this dimension, which shows that there are a lot of prospects for mutual learning for member states. And it also shows that the targets, that the benchmarks we set, we evaluate countries against, are not imaginary. They actually exist. Here is an example. For instance, the national strategy, when we look at it, there are a lot of green scores that could be informative, inspiring for the other member states, or likewise with the representation of migrant-led civil society. The 2 dimensions that countries overall are doing quite well in general, even though there are some that lag behind, are basically enabling collective civic engagement and civic education for a diversifying society. I'm going to now zoom in closely on some of these dimensions, but I would like to tell you that the report is simultaneously being made available to this presentation, and you can download it and see all the different results in relation to all the different dimensions that comprise the index. So the first one is the national strategy. As I said, it looks at the extent to which member states' national integration strategies address civic and political participation of people with migration backgrounds. It's pivotal because it provides the strategic framework that informs, coordinates the direction of other policy areas. We look at target groups of special concern, etc. And here, really the country that is exemplary in this area is Ireland, because it has a very clear strategy, and it is actually even improving on it with better budget allocation and monitoring mechanisms. It's in this process, as we recently learned from the policymakers in Ireland. But when we look at the different questions that compromise it, we see that there are also a lot of good practices in Portugal. In Germany, for instance, the budgetary allocation is more important in Germany, and setting standards, evaluation frameworks are mentioned in Portugal. So it is an area where there could be a lot of mutual learning among the member states, and it actually sets the strategy and so to say the the targets, the goals to be implemented in relation to political participation, which automatically have a positive effect on all the other dimensions. The second dimension is the encouragement to vote. Here we look at member states' efforts to encourage non-citizens to engage in political processes. And here you can see Sweden, followed by Finland, have the better strategies. Here we look at whether or not registration is automatic, whether or not there is a promotion of turning out in elections, information campaigns, and whether or not there are any policies targeting groups of special concern, including migrant women, migrant LGBTIQ+, and migrant persons with disabilities. At this point, maybe I'll pass it to Olivia for a brief zooming in on encouragement to vote and some good practices. And I can continue sharing the screen, maybe.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, alongside all of this indicator-based research that we've been doing, a large part of the research focus of this initiative is so-called bottom-up research that we've been doing with interviews conducted with migrant leaders and migrant-led organizations. And in conducting the most recent round of interviews, one of the focuses was talking to them about what really worked when they were campaigning to get people into voting. So, sorry, let me just change my slides. Bashak, are you sharing could you share the first slide?
Yeah, I am.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So these are the main points that they raised. There's nothing really unexpected here, but the fact that these are still recommendations that migrants are making demonstrates that although this understanding exists, a lot of it has yet to be translated into action to actually fill the kinds of policy gaps that Bashak had just been talking about. So the first one is there's a lack of clear multilingual information on how to vote as well as why. Many people either have no idea how or they don't even know that they can. They're very keen to exercise their democratic rights, but they don't know exactly how far these are extended to them, or that it's even an option at any stage of their residence. That was something that came up again and again. Next, we had, I mean, these two go hand in hand, really outreach. A lot of people said that they'd seen it really working when they made use of their local community partners, whether that's schools, religious places, any kind of community-based networks had been really powerful in helping them first kind of tailor their outreach, tailor their messaging to the people that they were hoping to encourage to vote, and also to get access to them in the first place. Use of inclusive language was a very big one that came up actually in our Democracy Academy a couple of weeks ago. Use of terms like we and us really emphasizes this togetherness and the idea that we are all in it together, and it reduces these negative views that we have of each other, these assumptions. All of this feels really obvious as I'm saying it, but it's clearly still something that hasn't yet happened. Debunking myths, highlighting economic impact, those are things obviously that can really work to make people reconsider their preconceived ideas of migrants. And in terms of actual campaigning, use of social media, use of texts, use of emails, again, translating various information. It really depends on the community that you're working with. So something we heard from quite a lot of people was that it didn't really work to do this one-size-fits-all campaigning approach because firstly, different communities are very different, and at the local level, different areas can be very different as well in terms of how the voting systems work. Maybe I should skip to the next slide. Thank you. So a very good practice that MPG was involved in back in 2018 was the Vote Brussels campaign, which was the largest voter registration campaign that has taken place in Brussels. And actually, I think Thomas, who is perhaps attending now, may want to say more on this. I don't know if you're there, Thomas, because he was very involved in this. It was a campaign that targeted EU citizens in Brussels to foster the inclusion of EU member citizens in civic and political life. MPG ran it, and it was sponsored by the Commission and the Brussels region. And it actually led to a doubling of the number of non-Belgian voters registered. And it reached, thanks Thomas, and it reached 49,000 in just 5 months, which is a 24% increase on what it was in 2012. And as a result, most Brussels authorities changed their registration procedures, changed their messaging, and changed their outreach based on what MPG had been recommending. And MPG did exactly what our research participants mentioned from my last slide. They utilized focus groups, and they did a lot of outreach based on what people were telling them they should be saying. In terms of concrete actions, they trained 100 citizen volunteers. They developed local petitions. They had space for citizens to develop their own initiatives based on what they thought their communities would best respond to. They had 80 events, which reached nearly 3,000 EU citizens. And again, yeah, they utilized social media, and they published a lot of stories in the Belgian media. All this to say, these kind of initiatives are already happening, and they do have the effect that we hope they would have. The issue is just that these actual policy gaps still remain in terms of making sure that people are encouraged to implement them. I think that's probably my time up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liv, and with this, I'm going to move to dimension 6, which is the last one that I want to zoom in before moving into the policy recommendations. And this dimension incorporates several aspects of representation of migrant-led civil society. It's a key area of participation, political participation, but however, it is quite overlooked by EU member states. And here we look at the several aspects of that promote migrant-led civil society's participation, the availability of public funding or in-kind support for organizations, the strength, representativeness, and scope of involvement of national consultative bodies, the existence of a national policy promoting stakeholder participation in policymaking in addressing the interests of diverse groups. And here again, the darker colors on the map indicate more favorable policies. And I can tell you that besides Portugal, only 3 other countries, member states, achieved a score above 50. Those are Luxembourg, Belgium, and Estonia, highlighting the substantial room for improvement in this area in most member states. And another interesting finding is the consultative bodies, bodies that represent migrants at the national level. And they are generally weak, marked by limited consultative powers, insufficient representation of vulnerable groups, and minimal participation in drafting of or monitoring legislation and policies. There is more on this in the report, but now I'll turn to Mariana for some good practice examples.
Thank you, Başak. So in this dimension, we identified a very good regional practice in Germany, in the state of Baden-Württemberg. This state has actually carried out several projects and initiatives to increase the participation of migrant-led organizations. Here I listed some of the projects. So the first project was strengthening and networking of migrants organizations. And this particular project involved especially municipalities, which were really encouraged to organize events to make migrants' organization more visible, or to carry out measures that increase the networking, both of migrants' organization among them, but also of migrants' organization with local municipalities. Another recent project which was funded by this state, previous slide, yeah, is the Intercultural Promoters Program, which is a capacity building program where people coming from migrant organizations that were called intercultural promoters, they would go to civil society organizations and other stakeholders of the civil society, and they would provide advice, networking opportunities, training, and other kinds of support in order to help these organizations to adopt a more intercultural approach and to strengthen migrants' involvement in these organizations. Moving on, another very important success of this state was to establish a service center for migrant organizations. which is also a service which helps migrants organization establishing permanent networks at the regional level. And as if this was not enough, the state has also funded training programs involving members of migrants organizations, as well as representatives of migrants at the municipal councils. And finally, the state has also funded some specific programs for vulnerable groups, and especially targeting Sinti and Roma groups and migrants from Southeastern Europe. These initiatives really highlight a strong commitment of this region to involve migrant-led civil society, which are actually a really crucial part of civil societies because they are in direct contact with the groups that integration policies aim to target, and therefore they can know better what are the needs and the views of those groups, and they can build a bridge between immigrants and the hosting societies, and also between immigrants and the political authorities. So they should really consider a very important contacts for politics and administration, as they really contribute to social cohesion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. To learn more about this particular good practice example and a lot more, please do refer to our full report. We are fully aware that political participation is not just a national issue, national policy area, and there is a lot at the local level which we cannot capture with the index itself. But through our experts, we have gathered quite a nice battery of these good practices, which also inform our policy recommendations that are to come. So to start with them, the first one is really about the national strategies. We cannot underline that enough. We think that member states should be encouraged to develop comprehensive integration strategies, prioritize knowledge sharing across the EU to promote effective practices, and allocate dedicated budgets and establish robust evaluation frameworks to measure progress on political participation of migrants. Once it is in the strategy, it sets the tone for all the different ministries, for all the different levels of governance as to what is expected, what are the objectives, what are the goals, and how they will be evaluated. The second one is related to enhancing political participation, of course. We recommend to expand voting and candidacy rights for non-citizens at local and regional levels to foster inclusion, simplify process for voter registration, naturalization, and obtaining long-term residency to remove these barriers to participation. And not only that, but also promote policies that ensure migrants' voices are heard through consultative bodies and civic platforms. Unfortunately, their effectiveness is in decline in some countries, and they are almost non-existent, and even if they exist, their effectiveness is really in question, so they should be more actively involved in policymaking. The third one is about promotion of inclusive societies. More effort should be put in investing civic education to increase awareness of political rights and democratic processes. Yet, yes, it is an area where member states are doing better compared to the others, but still the scores are not super high. Celebrate and support cultural diversity to create environments conducive to greater political engagement, and very importantly, scale local integration initiatives to national level to maximize their impact, because we've seen many local good practices in this particular area. So we hope that this index can inform NGOs, governments, international organizations, and researchers about their policies. But I'm not going to go much into this, and I really hope that Daniela will reflect on how useful it can be and how we can further work on this, maybe continue our work, updating it every year, maybe so that we can provide not just a snapshot of policies, but also trends over time. I'll stop at this and give the word to Daniela.
Thank you so much, Bashak and the team. First of all, for the invitation. I will start by, of course, congratulating you for taking the initiative of designing this new index, and also apologizing for my voice, but I have a cold for a few days, but I really hope that you can still understand me. So I think this is indeed a much needed initiative, not only because the topic is very important, it's very timely, as you mentioned, as Isabel mentioned at the beginning, given these global recent developments in democratic participation, but also in migrant integration. But I also believe that this index is important because it gives us, as you've seen, the opportunity to better understand what are the existing gaps, to better understand what are the challenges that EU member states still need to tackle in this arena. And we've seen it now with the good practices. I think the index could also serve quite nicely for policy learning. You have identified yourself many good practices that have been implemented in some member states, be it by national authorities, regional authorities, or local authorities that could inspire similar exercises elsewhere. Now, I believe that beyond the use of this index for informing policy and perhaps also for supporting advocacy for migrants' political inclusion, as a migration scholar myself, I also see its added value for contributing to this long-lasting debate that we've had in the academia about migrants' participation in democratic processes. Of course, we all know that there are several other projects, and many of the people in the room have contributed to this in the past, projects that aim to provide evidence and data about the political opportunity structure that EU member states put forward for their migrant populations. But in my view, this new index actually complements very nicely these existing initiatives because it brings several new important elements. And one of these elements, as Bashak already mentioned, is the fact that the index basically acknowledges in its conceptualization, but also in its methodology, the fact that political participation goes far beyond the act of voting. Of course, we all know that migrants' voting rights have triggered quite a lot of attention, which is also understandable, considering the importance of being enfranchised in order to participate in many processes, political processes. And this index, I find, actually reiterates this importance of voting rights because, as Bashak showed us, 2 of the 8 dimensions of the index are actually linked somehow to voting rights. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they are also among the index dimensions that actually score quite low. Of course, on the one side, because of this hesitation of several EU member states to still recognize voting rights in different types of elections to foreign residents, especially third country nationals. But on the other hand, what we've seen in this index as well is that member states actually have a rather limited commitment to practically encourage migrants' exercise of their voting rights when those voting rights are actually recognized. So I think that this is an important challenge for which this index is very useful. However, as I said before, the index invites us to reflect a little bit further on what is beyond the right to vote. It uses this definition of political participation that is actually much wider in scope. It covers much more than enfranchisement per se. It includes, as you've seen in the presentation, many other facets. Some of them are still linked to the institutional political framework of countries, such as having the right to stand as a candidate in election or having the right to become a party member and so on and so forth. It also brings into the equation, very interestingly, the perspective of extra-parliamentary activities. You will see it in the detailed report that there are indicators about protesting, petitioning, and so on. And quite importantly, I find it also explores broader aspects such as civic education programs in schools or appreciation of cultural diversity, which may not necessarily be the first thing that comes to one's mind when we speak, strictly speaking, about policies that target directly migrants' political participation. So in that sense, I feel that this new index mixes, in fact, different aspects regarding opportunities for civic engagement, opportunities for political participation, by adopting this broader, multi-layered, multi-dimensional understanding of these concepts. At the methodological level, the final ranking that Başak showed us, of course, is based on this aggregation scheme that was previously also used for MIPEX, which tends to give the same weight to all these different dimensions. But I think that for scholars in particular and for students in migration studies, it would be very important to try to dig a little bit more into comparisons and correlations between these different dimensions, to try to understand why states are active in some dimensions in particular, but less so in others. Because, of course, the motivations, the reach, the consequences of granting voting rights for foreigners may not be the same as the motivations and reach and consequences of introducing, for instance, civic education programs in schools. So I think scholars should reflect a little bit more on that. Then I also believe that a second important element that I personally appreciated quite a lot in the index, compared especially to previous data sources that we have, is that it seeks to unveil somehow how states may provide different opportunities for political engagement to different groups of beneficiaries. And here, the index refers to several potential beneficiaries. In fact, it includes EU citizens, it includes third country nationals, it includes migrants' descendants, beneficiaries of international protection as well. Now, it is true that not all the dimensions of the index inquire systematically about the policies applicable to all these different groups, but I believe that having this differentiation to begin with adds a very important nuance to this index compared, for instance, to the MIPEX methodology. And this nuance is particularly relevant, especially for some indicators. Take the ones of the right to active suffrage and passive suffrage, where states clearly implement different regulations depending on the nationality of different people. And also related to these different groups that are now captured in this new index, reading the report yesterday, it made me think of something that I haven't actually thought about before, which has to do with terminology and labeling, and how particularly this terminology could be interpreted or could be perceived. So the index is titled New Europeans Political Participation Policy Index. It also covers mobile youth citizens. It also covers, of course, descendants of non-EU migrants who are born, raised, live in EU member states. So perhaps when we reach out and disseminate this to a wider public, it would also be important to understand how different groups of individuals were classified as new Europeans and what it actually means to be a new European. And then the third added value that I see to this index is, of course, geographical coverage. This is extremely important. We need data. We need data for all EU member states. We need it in academia. We need it at the policy level as well. There are so many interesting aspects that are emerging from the results of that we've seen and which are detailed in the report. I would really encourage colleagues working in academia and students in migration studies as well to use this index in order to dig a little bit more into why specific groups of countries, for instance, that seem to share rather similar migration patterns actually return quite different policies when it comes to creating these institutional spaces to foster migrants' political engagement. I think that's particularly important. And one last final point that I wanted to make, and I'll conclude with that, perhaps this is just opening also the discussion for the roundtable, because I think it's important, this exercise is extremely important for showing us that there are some interesting results in specific policy dimensions that perhaps are not that intuitive and need to be further explored and further analyzed. Personally, I was quite intrigued also. Başak didn't show us the results for this, but they are in the report, and I suggest you have a look at them. I was intrigued by the results on the dimension of the voting rights, where the rankings seem a little bit different than what initially I would have personally expected. We see, for instance, that countries such as Germany or France, which do not recognize voting rights for third country nationals, and we've had long debates about that, still rank better than or in the same level as countries such as Belgium, which do enfranchise both EU citizens and third country nationals. We also see that Belgium scores lower than Spain, another interesting case study, because Spain enfranchises third country nationals based only on reciprocity agreements, but it leaves out many sizable migrant communities, such as the Moroccan communities, just to give an example. And we also see, for instance, that Spain scores higher than Portugal. Portugal, again, being another country that has these reciprocity clauses in recognition of voting rights. But it is still a rather exceptional case among European countries for granting, for instance, other possibilities for political engagement, also at the national level, to the Brazilian community. And I see Lucinda is here, so maybe she will tell us more about it in the roundtable. And very importantly, I fully agree with Basak. Time is an important element. I really hope that now you provided us with a snapshot of these results, very interesting ones, but I really hope that just like you did with MyPEX, you are going to find the means to redo this exercise in the future, because for us it's extremely important to have longitudinal data as well and to identify patterns of convergence or divergence across time. So thanks again and congratulations for the initiative.
Should I continue, Başak? Okay. Thank you so much, Daniela. So as we saw in the presentation, we don't have a really promising picture when we see the overall results, but still, like with your presentation, with your comments, we can see that this index can be a really good tool, first of all, to raise awareness about this issue, like why political participation is very important. And maybe just a quick comment about the voting rights. This, like how we see these different results and different scores, which can be also like confusing why Belgium has the same score. And we have like the recent policy brief really zooming in these voting rights. Maybe one of my colleagues can share it in the chat so that like if people are interested, because voting rights is one of the most important dimensions in this index, and also it really gives like various results like compared to other dimensions, because we have the EU mobile citizens issue there as well. So now we are going to use this last half an hour to zoom in some countries. Like we have some of our experts here, Latvia, Poland, Portugal, Luxembourg. And also, if we have time, like Lithuania also we have here, so they can also comment. So in this session, I would like to open the floor with a general question, and then I will ask one by one to our experts to really comment on one of the aspects that they find really important in their context. We would like to hear more about the successful initiatives on the ground and also challenges that still need to be addressed. And Daniela started, but we would like to hear at the country level how they can see this index as a tool to guide future improvements, especially the challenges, tackling the challenges ahead. I would like to start with like a positive example, like with one of the good scored countries, Portugal. Maria Lucinda is here with us. The floor is yours, Maria. So you have 3 to 4 minutes for your comments.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. Well, Portugal, as you mentioned, is in the top 5 in political participation with a score of 59, and this is due to inclusive voting rights. And relatively easy access to citizenship and also support for migrant civil society organizations. So these are the most positive elements. And of course, civic education, which is really quite important to prepare for the future. And this is an element where Portugal scores quite well. In any case, I would like to mention some important challenges that Portugal are facing, and maybe the situation is not so positive as the index can show. If we look at the main challenges and areas for improvement, of course, one of the important things is the diversity of migrant groups and the recent increase of migrants in Portugal. Recent arrivals from Brazil, South Asia, and Africa diversify the landscape, requiring more targeted civic inclusion. In fact, in recent years, the growth of immigrant population was very high, 33% just between 2022 to 2023. This means the high number of undocumented migrants in Portugal. So, and this prolonged waiting times for migrants to secure appointments for legal regularization that reflect systemic inefficiencies in Portugal's immigration services, and this delay exacerbate undocumented status, leaving many migrants vulnerable to exploitation and exclusion. So this is really problematic. And the extinction of a manifestation of interest mechanism to formalize residence and integrate into society is also very problematic. I can tell you that 3 months ago, there were more than 400,000 immigrants in a limbo situation, waiting for regularization. They were in the waiting list for an appointment. And despite the fact that the government created a task force to accelerate this process, in fact, the rejection rate is quite high, around 50%. So these barriers create a backlog in the system, delaying migrants' ability to access legal residence, vote, or stand for elections. So this is, in fact, very important. And another big challenge comes from the fact that is the inactivity of the Observatory of Migration. Monitoring is quite important. And in fact, during the last year, the Observatory of Migration, which plays a very important role in monitoring integration policies, has been largely inactive. A new director has been appointed, but we don't have budget and so on. So this lack of oversight impedes data collection, policy evaluation, and the dissemination of best project. So, another problem, another challenge for the future is the lack of funding for most of the initiatives and the positive initiatives that were going on. So, just to summarize, of course, Portugal, the index is very useful, very important, and Portugal has some very good practices, but I'm really concerned about the number of migrants that are outside these mechanisms because of these recent changes, the challenges of future. So this reinforces the importance of the index and having information and monitoring all this evolution, because the political dimension of integration is crucial, as as the study mentions, and also this was underlined by Daniela. But I'm really concerned about these recent changes and developments.
Thank you, Maria. Now I would like to move to Poland. Our expert Renata Stefanska. Please try to keep it to 3 minutes. Just focus on one dimension, one zoom in point, so that we can give time to other experts as well. Thank you, Renata.
Okay, so I would like to provide you with the update in Poland, and as unfortunately it's not a good news because the Polish government has recently adopted a new migration strategy, and it was a long-awaited document. However, it doesn't contain anything about political participation in Poland, although it was believed that it will. So it is called Regain Control and Ensure Security, which means that it focuses generally on security concerns. There is even one measure envisaged in this document that may even make it more difficult for political participation of migrants because it envisages tightening of naturalization requirements, including the introduction of a citizenship test. So the score will be probably even lower. However, a separate immigrant integration strategy is being developed by the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Policy. So maybe this will change a little bit the situation in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata, and thank you for keeping it super focused. Now we are moving to Luxembourg, one of our maybe the highest score, like we can say, the country. Our expert Sergej Kolwelter is with us. Please, Sergej.
Yes.
I hope I'm saying it right.
Good morning, everybody. Well, it is a long way done in Luxembourg from the derogations we got in the Maastricht Treaty for voting rights, because today it's open to all foreigners, EU citizens, as well as third country nationals. They can be even elected as a mayor. But the reality on the field is more modest. For instance, in the last elections for municipal elections 2023, there was only 19% of the people had registered. You must know that in Luxembourg, the voting is compulsory, so you have to register. And once you have registered, it's compulsory for you to being EU citizens or TCN. There were only 10% of the candidates in the 100 municipalities were foreigners, 335 EU citizens, and 44 TCNs. I can share the numbers with you. Among the total of 1,100 elected members, there were only 21 citizens of EU and no TCN being elected. The modest opening in the political parties regarding the candidates they proposed is very low too. I won't cite all the numbers. It's beyond 10 only for the small parties and very low for the main political parties. And we must not forget that there was a very big coup in 2015. There had been a referendum asking for political participation for voting rights on national level, which was promoted by 4 of the most important parties, and there were 80% of the population saying no. And that is still, of course, very present in the atmosphere. The languages, we have a special situation regarding languages, and in the city councils, only Luxembourgian is admitted. So if you don't speak, even if you are elected and you don't speak Luxembourg, is no chance. The political communication in the electoral campaigns is almost only done in Luxembourgian. So we have a very good legal framework, very positive, but a very low and modest real situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will also hear from Latvia. Our expert Darta Pelse is here. Very shortly, please, again, so that we can have some time for questions.
I will try to be as brief as possible. I would like to focus on aspects regarding representation of migrant communities and overall civic engagement. To be more precise, even if the participation mechanisms are there in some of the municipalities and a not national level, as the score shows, there's problems regarding representation of migrant-led civil society, which is really related to administrative barriers migrants face in regard to making these NGOs and organizing advocacy efforts and from getting funding for these activities. But we see also good practices where NGOs have done capacity building seminars for newcomers for Ukrainian civilians newly arrived in Latvia in the past few years, and this has led to several Ukrainian-led organizations in Latvia who were able to attract funding for their activities. And one of the organizations actually also was a candidate for the memorandum council between NGOs and the cabinet of ministers. So this is quite a good development, and it also shows that targeted capacity building activities can promote the representation of migrants in political life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dartan. Now we have just 13 minutes for questions and comments from all participants. The questions can be related to the presentation of Başak, Olivia, and Mariana, or to our country experts. Please feel free to introduce yourself and then ask your question by raising your hand.
I'm expecting one to come from Thomas, the starters.
Yeah, like it's an icebreaker. So. We cannot hear you, so you're muted.
Hi, everyone. Thomas Huddleston here. I wanted to make a kind of a general comment hearing the reflections from our local partners. And that is that, you know, I've observed that since most people are not tackling political participation in their integration strategies, those of us that do are very lonely in our work. And we are increasing awareness in the general political system of the needs of immigrants that are not being faced. That's what also happens when you come to the table. You start to increase general awareness of the ways that policies are not working and of implementation that is not working. And in this type of work, I've become very aware of what's known as the de Tocqueville paradox. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but basically when you're in systems that are trying to be more equitable, we become more aware of inequality and we try to fight it. So for all of us in countries that are making efforts, like here in Belgium, we have to make sure not to fall into the de Tocqueville paradox and saying that even though we're making these kind of efforts, they're not actually doing anything to raise awareness, because actually we are bringing forward greater awareness of the issues that foreigners are making, and we are supporting leaders who are starting to make changes. So to our country partners in, say, you know, Luxembourg and Portugal, I'd be really interested to know who are the migrant leaders and initiatives that are inspiring you in your work to address some of the challenges that you are seeing.
So was this a question to Luxembourg to?
Yeah, Luxembourg, Portugal,
sorry.
any of our other country experts that want to talk about, again, some of the new leaders that have been brought forward because of these initiatives and the inspiration or good practice that you are seeing them develop.
Anyone who would like to take this? Maybe Luxembourg? You're muted. Yeah.
I have no particular information to give you, Thomas, on that point. You got it?
Okay.
You heard me?
Yes, we heard you.
Okay.
Okay, we have one more question. Maybe we can give the floor to Fatih for his question, and then
I think Maria Lucinda wants to contribute at this point.
I did not see the hand. Yes, sure. Then Maria Lucinda first. I didn't see that.
I totally agree with Thomas. This is really very, very important. Well, in the case of Portugal, the Brazilian organizations and Casa do Brasil, since the Brazilians are the biggest community in Portugal, are making a big effort in order to try to mobilize migrants in political participation and so on. But I don't have much more information about that.
Thank you, Maria. And Fatih, for your question or comment.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
So we cannot hear you, so your voice is...
Hear me now, or now? Is it possible?
Better, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. First of all, thank you very much. It's very eye-opening and it's incredible. And I have a particular interest in this because I've been working on a tool exactly on your findings. So I will be in touch probably with Başak Hoca and Sinem as well, hopefully in the future. But I could add, with the permission of Professor Maria Lucinda, to the question was made. And actually, I'm from Portugal as well. I'm a Portuguese citizen as well. And it was amazing to be able to know that I could vote when I immigrated to Portugal in 2005, and in 2007 when I had my permanent residence, I received a letter and saying that I could vote for local elections, and it was I was shocked. I said, like, probably this is a mistake, but then I asked, and it was amazing. So then when I started to study immigration with at Nova FCS, Professor Maria Lucinda would know that the immigration, I heard that there's I learned that there's a really very strong tradition in Portugal about incentivizing immigrants to be part of democratic situation, democratic participation. And therefore, there is a very big Bangladeshi, for example, society there who are able to vote both there and also influence their country there as well in Bangladesh. I would just wanted to add this, but I would like to ask if you had a particular focus, because I couldn't see that there, if you had a particular focus on new technologies and how could they be integrated within the system and the use of them regarding to elevate the participation. This is one of the questions, and the second is MPG doing an advocacy, or is afterwards, like for this study, will outcome of this study have an impact in something, maybe in influencing policies in Brussels and in individual European countries, or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatih. Başak, are you there? Maybe you would like to comment on the digitalization aspect? Yeah, I think we just found that moment that she was not available. I don't know if Alexander, you would like to comment on the advocacy part, and if MPG is planning to do an advocacy on this later.
Well, we could use this as a tool for policymakers and policy stakeholders to use it in their advocacy work, of course. And we will have launch events related to this tool next year, together with the updated MyPICs. So our goal with these indices always is to produce something that is really of use for the practitioners. So I think we are not directly involved in advocacy as MPG, but we are, I think, feeding into advocacy work with these instruments.
And Başak, so Fatih's comment on like digitalization, like if we consider that in the index, so maybe you can comment on that.
We did not directly, but we did ask country experts about some good practices, which they could bring that up, where they could bring that up, but that didn't come up. Even though I am aware that that is an important conversation that member states are having on overall participatory models, more inclusive models, not just vis-a-vis migrants, but all groups. But I think it is also because a lot of these platforms, we considered them as we were creating the index, actually, these participatory models, but we realized that they were really more on the local level. And because the index is looking more at a national level, there wasn't much room for us to integrate that into our indicators. But if we take it down to the local level, that is definitely something to look at. Or if that gets brought up to the national level, it's definitely something to consider. Thank you very much for this input.
Maybe just one last question from Michaela Klante, please.
Thank you. I'm the Danish country coordinator. Thank you for this valuable tool and your recommendations. They will be really useful for us. I would just like to comment on something from the Danish angle, is a kind of dilemma or paradox I see in the Danish policy, that on one hand, the government is trying to promote participation in political level in different ways. On the other hand, they're doing everything they can to put up hindrances and barriers from citizenship, which is the actual like real influence on national policies. So and it's getting worse and worse every year. So now we have a situation where 1 out of 10 inhabitants in Denmark do not have citizenship, which means they don't have access to vote at national elections and also EU elections. So I think this is a growing problem that maybe you should try to see if this is a tendency in other countries too, that there is this kind of now it's like almost impossible to obtain Danish citizenships, and even people who are born and raised here have really serious difficulties in obtaining it.
Just maybe as a quick answer, there are multiple trends on this that we realize. One of them is what you described. A similar one is on the increasing requirements is being debated in Finland at the moment, with the integration courses and language requirements being introduced. And that not only affects the political participation scores, but also MyPIC scores of these countries. And a similar, but even more dangerous pattern is what we see in some East European member states. That is for instance, the language requirements are not increased on the paper, but actually what they mean is a whole lot different over the years. So they are actually in effect, in practice, increased. But for instance, B1 describes or A2 describes something different every year, and the courses get more and more difficult. Or it looks like the documents are not much, just the CV is requested, but the CV means like there's a very thorough background check, which takes forever, and with any slight thing can be a grounds for rejection based on that CV. So we see this kind of patterns also, but there's always a little bit of silver lining. For instance, with Germany allowing dual citizenship lately, or making it more available for high-skilled migrants after 3 years. So those are also some positive changes, but what you're describing unfortunately seems to be more the trend than the German exception in this case, and this will reflect on the lower scores of the countries because citizenship acquisition is a dimension that we look at.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your questions and comments. Now I will give the floor to Isabel to close the session. You're muted, Isabel.
Yeah, I just noticed. Sorry. Well, thank you very much to all of you for attending the webinar. Thank you very much again to MPG staff, especially Alex, Bashak, Sinem, but also Thomas, and our wonderful stagiaire through the months, Shabnam, Constanza, Anna, and Mariana. It's really something that is fascinating. I mean, the MyPEX, and we're looking forward in the future to further extend it. So what are the next steps for the New Europeans Initiative? The report is published as of today on the MPG website. In 2025, so next year, very soon, there will be additional events in a number of countries to present and discuss the results. So that might go back to the question that would ask regarding advocacy. And that will go together with the launch of the complete updated MyPEX, so our broader integration policy index, as you know, in the second half of 25 in a policy conference in Brussels. The European Commission, before I forget, kindly asks all participants of SURF-funded projects to complete a short survey. So we have to do this. We will send you an email with the link afterwards. And we thank you very much in advance for taking part in this research, because it's helping the Commission to further develop the SURF program and its support for democracy and civil society, and indirectly support to organizations like ours. Finally, I would like to say a big thank you to the speakers, to all the researchers, to MPG team again, and to the participant of the webinar. And because it's the season, and I'm not sure we'll have the opportunity to see each other, I wish you a very good holiday season. And thanks again, Alex, Bashak, Sinem, Liv, and Mariana, all the MPG team who were there. Thank you very much.